When I first heard the story, I immediately thought of my mother. She works in Memphis and I grew up listening to these conversations. This isn't just content for the sake of use, it's a real-life experience that everyone can relate to. Our goal is to help you avoid repeating other people's mistakes, and all names and titles in the story are fictional, of course.
She slammed the handbook down on my desk like it was a damn warrant for my arrest. Pages flared open, some dog-eared, some still pristine from the printer, but all of them flapping around like the breathless end of a bad sermon. Her lip curled, smug like she'd just discovered gravity. "Did you even glance at our core values?" she snapped, like I was the janitor caught stealing printer ink. I stared at her. Not at the MBA smugness or the perfect blowout she probably billed to the company card. I stared at the handbook. Because I'd written it. Only the original version, of course. The one before the formatting got corporate and the values became more about disruption than discipline. Before the mission statement got hijacked by TED Talk nonsense and my operational blueprints became afterthoughts in neon slide decks. That handbook, the one she was swinging like a purity test, still had my margin notes hidden in the footer code. She didn't know that. She didn't know anything. And yet here she was, barking culture at me like I hadn't spent the last 12 years keeping this Frankenstein of a firm from burning to the ground every fiscal quarter. Hey, real quick, if this story hits different, if you're already gripping your phone like I was gripping that Claus archive, do us a favor. Like the video and subscribe. 97% of people don't, and honestly, it's the best way to keep stories like this from getting buried under algorithmic nonsense. Helps the team, keeps this stuff alive. All right, back in. The day Martin brought her in, I knew I was being buried alive. We were at the off-site. Hilton ballroom, round tables with name cards, potted succulents, and that eerie synthetic smell that only wafts off fresh conference binders and too many egos in one air-conditioned room. Martin took the stage like he always did. Relaxed, charismatic, the human version of a well-poured old-fashioned. He introduced her with a smile so wide it should have had a warning label. "Madison Kelt," he said, letting the syllables roll like a red carpet. Fresh from Stanford, MBA with a focus in organizational strategy, she'll be leading post-merger integration. You could practically hear the consultants clapping in the background. "She's also here to realign our cultural values," Martin added. "Expect some exciting shifts." That's when she strutted over to me, like a prosecutor approaching the defendant in some mid-tier legal drama, and waved the damn handbook. "Starting today," she said, "we live these words." I nodded. No expression, no pushback. Just reached for my laptop, opened a secure folder, and clicked into the Founder Clause archive. Section 8.4c, buried halfway down a document nobody but legal and I remembered. Founding operational architect retains approval rights on mergers involving 100 mm exposure or non-board executive installation. Still valid, still binding, still signed. Martin had forgotten, or pretended to, but contracts don't pretend. They just sit and wait. That night, I poured a glass of Cabernet that had been sitting on my shelf since pre-COVID and reread the clause like it was scripture. They thought they were bringing in new blood. What they didn't realize was that the old blood had written the damn circulation system. By Monday morning, I was already seeing signs. My project queue got reassigned to review. Not rejected, not discussed. Just quietly paused like I'd suddenly forgotten how to run ops. Meeting invites disappeared from my calendar. My approvals pinged back with vague flags. Pending realignment. Requires Madison review. Obsolete chain of command. I wasn't being moved aside. I was being scrubbed. But what they forgot, what she didn't know, is that I don't operate in public. I don't need applause. I built the control systems with redundancy. I automated the safety nets. I wrote the fallback chains and seeded my own credentials into the core integration framework. This firm didn't run on ideas. It ran on process, and every process still whispered my name, so I waited, quiet, watching, the same way you watch the tremble of a glass on a table just before the earthquake. Let her bring her values, let her wave her handbook, let her think the room belonged to her. She hadn't even seen the blueprints. The second she said alignment, I knew we were about to get steamrolled by someone who thought synergy was a KPI. It was all in her tone, airy, curated, like she practiced it in the mirror next to her ring light. She talked like every sentence was the final line of a Forbes article no one actually finished reading. I'd seen her type before. Bright-eyed strategy types who think culture is a mood board and org charts are personal vision quests. But this one had a unique flavor. Nepotism, with a leadership minor. Lennox Strategies was the real deal. Lean, agile, flush with capital, and hungry for vertical integration. The kind of merger that should have taken 18 months minimum, but Martin wanted it done in 6. Fast track the future, he said in the kickoff meeting like he was launching a podcast. Madison nodded from the corner, flipping through slides she didn't design, quoting stats she didn't verify. Her badge still had that stiff new lanyard crease. She hadn't even memorized the printer code yet. Integration begins with intention, she said during her intro, and my intention is to harmonize legacy systems with forward-facing values. I nearly choked on my stale conference room coffee. Someone clapped. A week later, she was in my department's shared Slack channel dropping motivational quotes at 7:12 a.m. like she thought she was building morale through emojis. One of my senior analysts pinged me privately. "Is this performance art?" I didn't answer. I was too busy mapping out the exact moment she'd tried to uninstall me like a legacy plugin. What Martin called evolution looked a lot more like vanity in a power suit. I watched him orbit her like she was a young star he'd just discovered, beaming, radiant, pure potential. What he forgot was that stars implode, and usually on schedule. Every merger has 2 stories, the one in the press release and the one buried in system logs, vendor pipelines, and compliance records. I'd built those logs. I knew where the fault lines lived. That clause, 8.4c, was never meant to be flashy. It wasn't designed to be a weapon. It was an insurance policy, a circuit breaker for ego, and I kept it updated like a garden I didn't want anyone to know I loved. While she walked the halls with her culture realignment task force, clipboard in hand, talking about unlocking human capital, I started pulling access logs. Not her fault, really. She didn't know you don't touch operational architecture unless you're ready to bleed for it. She'd already made her first mistake. Her streamlining plan had been shared with a few department heads. One of them, a nervous VP in legal, forwarded it to me with a 2-word subject line, FYI. Madison wanted to consolidate project oversight, restructure key departments, and redefine legacy roles with a new hierarchy built around adaptive leadership silos. Translation, she was gunning for me, softly, politely, death by flowchart. But it wouldn't be enough. Because what no one realized, not Madison, not Martin, not the analysts quoting her LinkedIn, was that this merger couldn't legally move without my signature. And even if they managed to bulldoze past that inconvenient truth, the back-end systems wouldn't let them. Not until I said yes. So I let them run their welcome party. I watched the swag bags go out. Branded notebooks, overpriced pens, water bottles with slogans like "One Team, One Dream." I attended the integration lunches, listened to her talk about workplace ecosystems, smiled through the rebranding sessions where she suggested renaming operations to future enablement. Then I went back to my desk, logged into the Founder Clause archive, and began preparing my notice of conflict. The first time I was left off the strategy subcommittee invite, I chalked it up to oversight. The second time, I knew it wasn't. I'd sat in that meeting for 12 years straight, even through the year-end panic cycles and a bout of norovirus. My name had always been on the docket until suddenly it wasn't. And in its place, nestled neatly between executive team expansion and innovation incubator planning, was Madison's, smiling from the center seat like she'd finally unlocked the cheat code to C-suite relevance. No call, no meeting, no coffee run diplomacy, just a silence thick enough to choke on. Then the approvals started bouncing. Every project I queued, paused, not rejected, not flagged for revision, just returned with a bland little note. Pending realignment review. My team stopped CCing me. Vendors started emailing someone else. One even sent me a congrats on the new chapter message like I'd already been put out to pasture. And then it arrived, slipped into my inbox like a paper cut. Madison's assistant, writing with the kind of over-politeness that always comes with betrayal. We're streamlining senior roles. Your function is being assessed for redundancy. Redundancy. After 12 years. redundancy, no exit interview, no reassignment, no clarification. Just a soft little message implying I'd become outdated, an old file format they didn't feel like converting. They thought they could push me out quietly, the classic slow fade, shrink the oxygen until the flame dies and nobody even remembers the heat. But they forgot one thing. I'm not the kind you sunset. I'm the kind that runs in the walls. I'm the part you only notice when you try to tear it out and the lights stop working. So I sent back one thing, a calendar invite. Subject line, Clause 8.4c, review required. Time stamped. Locked. Sent to Martine, Legal, and Madison herself. They declined it within 6 minutes. No message, no comment, just a flat, efficient decline, which told me all I needed to know. They'd read it. They knew, and they were gambling that I wouldn't pull it. What they didn't know was that the clause was live, not symbolic, not ceremonial, but functional, enforceable, and embedded in every damn line of the post-merger protocol. They could strip me from threads. They could ghost my calendar. They could build their own war room of new ideas and startup slogans. But none of it would process. Not fully, not legally, not operationally, because I held the lock. So I didn't fight them. I didn't storm into offices or demand FaceTime. I let them run their little coup, sipping their cold brews and high-fiving over cultural fluidity like they were rewriting the 10 Commandments. And while they did, I started documenting. Access logs, change requests, approval bounces, Slack threads, Madison's streamlining memo, every little sign that they were building a new structure without a permit. I wasn't angry. Not yet. That would come later. Right now, I was patient, methodical, surgical even, because when you design the system, you know where it breaks. I didn't send it with any fanfare, just a plain PDF attachment, time-stamped, labeled Notice of Conflict, no exclamation points, no CC storm, just facts. Section 8.4c, highlighted like a slow-burning fuse. Right below it, the signature from Martin himself, dated, notarized, and locked into the founder's agreement like a dormant nerve about to fire. The body of the email was even shorter. As per Section 8.4c, I have not issued written approval for the proposed merger or recent executive structuring. Attached, please find the original clause and relevant operational documentation suggesting unapproved activity. I attached the access logs, time-stamped entries showing Madison's permissions expanding well beyond her pay grade, file edits with metadata showing her copying, overwriting, and in one case outright deleting operational documents I had written. I included Slack screenshots to not hearsay, not speculation, but receipts. My personal favorite was a message she sent in her private Align leadership thread. Jonathan's protocols are deeply outdated. We'll phase them out post-merge. Systemic overhaul is cleaner without his fingerprints. She had no idea the integrations bot backed up private channels to a secure audit server. The board didn't respond right away, but legal did, not with a statement, just a forward. No commentary, just a subject line. Escalated, Clause 8.4c, violation. It was addressed to Dalton Rains, our primary investor, a man who smiled like a hunting knife and wrote checks like they were sentencing memos. I'd only met him in person twice. Once when we closed Series B, and once when he shook my hand after we cleared regulatory hell during a failed acquisition in Luxembourg. He didn't talk much, but he read everything. By the next morning, I knew he'd read it twice. The audit log showed him accessing my PDF at 3:04 a.m. Eastern, and then again at 5:12, 2 full reads. He didn't ask questions, he didn't need to. The clause was airtight, and what Madison had done, slipping into core operational systems, signing off on role shifts, even greenlighting preliminary vendor changes, qualified as unauthorized restructuring under that very clause. Her moves weren't just premature, they were invalid. I watched the ripple start almost immediately. Not a public panic. Dalton didn't operate that way. Just pressure, quiet and intense, pushing outward from the inside. The kind of pressure that clears rooms and freezes initiatives. By noon, Madison's face vanished from the internal project dashboard. A shared doc she'd started. Phase 1, new chain of command. Suddenly locked with a permissions error. My inbox lit up with a dozen backdated invites to meetings I'd been removed from the week before. Reinstated. No explanation. Legal followed up with one line, "We're conducting a procedural review." They weren't reviewing procedure. They were bracing for exposure. See, this wasn't just about the merger. It was about investor liability, about how a 3.1B deal could be jeopardized by an unauthorized exec slipping into a role she had no legal right to hold. Madison thought she was playing politics. She didn't know she was tampering with a live circuit. I didn't respond to the reinstated invites. I didn't say a word to legal. I didn't even look at Martin when we passed in the corridor, and he gave me a sheepish, tight-lipped nod like he knew the tide had turned. I just watched the system do what it was designed to do, self-correct. Madison came in swinging, like confidence could outmaneuver contract law. Her first move was to call legal and claim the clause had sunsetted with Series D, said it was symbolic, a founder-era artifact that didn't apply under our current capitalization table. I didn't say a word. I let her run with it, let her toss jargon like confetti, thinking volume was the same as substance. But Raines's team didn't run on volume. They ran on paper, and it didn't take them long, less than a day actually. I got the ping at 10:47 the next morning, Dalton's chief counsel, CCing legal and 2 board members, attaching a clean PDF of the original operating agreement. No red lines, no commentary, just the raw doc, like a body pulled from a frozen lake. Clause 8.4c, bottom of page 6, still valid, still enforceable. Clause survives Series D under paragraph 3.1, sub-bullet B, unless explicitly revoked by written board majority. No such revocation found. That was the exact line. Dalton's team had underlined it. There it was in black and white. My veto power didn't just persist. It was active, binding, unshakable. And it extended to any transaction over $100 million in exposure, or any executive install not approved by the board. Madison's appointment? Not approved. The merger? Now functionally frozen. And just when she thought that was the worst of it, they found the memo. Her streamlining initiative had been floating around the executive inboxes for days. I'd already flagged it privately, but now Raines's analysts tore it apart like wolves on a carcass. The language was clear. Too clear. Reallocation of senior operational oversight to a vertically aligned structure led by strategic integration, sunsetting redundant executive functions, forward-facing realignment under transitional leadership. That wasn't a pitch. That was a restructure. And in our documentation, our binding, signed documentation, any restructure required founding architect written approval. She had none. Worse, she'd already implemented parts of it. Back-end access changes, project rerouting, reassigned approval chains, all of it logged, all of it traceable. Every move she made left fingerprints, and now the investors were brushing for prints. Madison tried to pivot, said it was exploratory, theoretical, not meant to be implemented yet. But the timestamps didn't lie. One of the vendor systems had already processed a role update under her name. That alone made it an operational decision. The room got very quiet, very fast. Martin looked like he wanted to disappear into his conference chair. He didn't speak much, just kept staring at the clause like he was reading his own gravestone. I could almost hear the clock in his head, ticking backwards, counting down to the moment he'd forgotten I had written the original merger protocols. Not legal, not finance. Me. Madison had been hunting a legacy ghost, and she'd found it. Only it wasn't a ghost. It was the bedrock. Power hadn't shifted. It had just been quiet. And now the silence was gone. The system kicked back the denial at 8:03 a.m. It was supposed to be a routine pre-merger handshake. Nothing flashy, just a back-end sync between Lennox's architecture and ours. Firewall approvals, permissions alignment, basic IP cross-verification. A script so standard I could have run it in my sleep. But this time, it didn't run. Instead, it halted mid-sequence, red screen, denial code. Authorization 08.4c not verified. Under it, a single set of initials, mine. It was quiet at first, no alarm, no buzz, just a slow buildup of silence from the tech room. One of the Perigal analysts leaned back in his chair, blinking at the screen like it had personally insulted him. Another tried rerunning the sync. Same code. Denied. Within minutes, a flurry of emails exploded across the internal network. Integration halted, permissions froze, Slack channels turned into war rooms. Every system was behaving like it had run into a concrete wall, and that wall was me. See, I hadn't revoked access, I just never signed off. And the core infrastructure, the one I'd built, coded, tested, and locked down before half these people had their first LinkedIn headshot, was still obeying the old rules, the ones I wrote. Madison tried to frame it as a glitch. Technical misfire, she called it, waving a manicured hand over the boardroom monitor like she could make the red denial screen disappear by sheer force of charisma. She started throwing jargon like tinsel. "We'll override the legacy script," she said. "Probably a caching error." Rains didn't blink. He stood there, one hand in his pocket, watching the red screen pulse like a heartbeat. Then he turned to Martine. Voice low, calm. "Resolve this, or we walk." 6 words, no threat, no raised voice, just the surgical precision of a man who had watched one too many promising investments tank because of ego and paperwork. Martin opened his mouth, but nothing came out. He looked like someone had unplugged him. The silence sat thick in the room. Even Madison didn't speak, just stared at the screen like it had betrayed her personally. The irony was perfect. For all her culture talk, all her values realignment, all her strategic reframing of legacy systems, it wasn't a board vote or a power play that stopped her. It was the code. Hardwired, signed, protected. The authorization script hadn't changed in a decade. Buried deep in the system, flagged as critical override, it checked for one thing on deals north of $100 or with executive implications. Written approval from founding architect. And when it didn't find that approval, it shut everything down. You can't bluff a system like that. You can't hand-wave your way past a gate that doesn't speak buzzwords. It doesn't care about your father's title or your shiny MBA. It only listens for one thing. And this time, it heard nothing. I didn't gloat. I didn't even move. I just watched the screen do what it was supposed to do. And for the first time since she arrived, Madison didn't have a single word to say. She had a fresh slide deck. Of course she did. Clicking through like nothing had happened, like the system hadn't just rejected her entire career trajectory that morning. The screen behind her flashed a new logo treatment. Lennox's burnt orange fused with our deep navy in some god-awful branding compromise that looked like a bruised fruit. Unified Futures, it said in the corner. Subtitle, A New Leadership Era. I walked into the room just as she was saying the words, operational flattening. She didn't even flinch when she saw me, just kept clicking. Like if she kept moving, reality couldn't catch her. Rains was already seated, silent, watching. Martin sat at the end of the table, hands clasped like he was praying to a version of this meeting that didn't end in fire. And with these structural pivots, Madison was saying, voice smooth but tight around the edges, we'll transition toward a more agile, cross-functional leadership model that... Has Jonathan approved this transition? The question landed like a pin dropped in a church. Rains didn't raise his voice. He didn't look up from the deck. He just asked it, flat, direct, unimpressed. Madison blinked. Her remote hand hesitated mid-click. I wasn't aware he had to. And that was it. The moment the air shifted, the exact second she realized this wasn't her pitch anymore. This was a review. Rains turned. I was already walking in. No folder, no laptop, no documents, just me. Clause 8.4c, I said, calm, still active. Silence. Even the projector fan sounded too loud. Martin sank an inch lower into his chair. His fingers drummed once on the table, then stopped. He didn't make eye contact. He didn't try to spin it. For the first time in a long time, he looked like he remembered what it felt like to not be in control. Madison opened her mouth, then closed it. The deck behind her flicked to the next slide, an org chart she'd redesigned with her name, dead center. Strategic integration lead. Not anymore. Rains stood, not fast, not theatrical, just deliberate. He picked up the printed copy of her proposal and tapped the corner against the table twice. A quiet little sound, and then he looked directly at her. This constitutes an executive restructuring. She nodded, slow. And? She never approved it. He turned to me. Will you? I looked at the chart, at the forced alignment of departments that had no business being cross-managed, at her name in bold, at the bold assumptions beneath it. No, I said, No anger, no drama, just clarity. I won't approve a structure that destabilizes operational continuity, and I won't rubber stamp someone who's already violated protocol to install herself. Rains gave one small nod. Then he turned to Madison. We'll be revisiting your role. And just like that, the room collapsed inward. Not in volume, not in movement, but in energy, like someone had pulled the tension plug and let it all drain into the carpet. Madison stood frozen, hands still clutching the remote as if there was another slide she could click to fix it all. There wasn't. Martin exhaled so quietly I almost missed it. I turned and walked out. Because my job wasn't to argue, it was to confirm. She stayed after the lights dimmed, long after the others had slipped out with their laptops and limp handshakes, trying to pretend the day hadn't spun them sideways. I saw her shadow once, blurred through the frosted glass of the conference room, just standing there, still holding that damn deck like she was waiting for the slides to tell her what went wrong. She didn't knock, didn't try to find me. But sometime between 9 odd and 10 hours, she left a note on my desk. Handwritten, real paper, ink slightly smudged at the edge like she'd hovered too long before writing the last word. I didn't know who you were, it started. I thought you were just... And that's where it ended. No signature, no justification, just silence. Next to it was the handbook. The same one she'd waved at me during her grand entrance back when she thought culture was something you printed. But this time, it looked different. Corners bent, spine creased, a few pages marked with sticky flags and quiet questions in the margins. She'd actually read it. Not the glossed-up, watered-down version she'd carried around like a talisman, but the old bones, the original copy. The one I'd built with Martin, back before board seats and liquidity events turned values into punchlines. My margin notes were still there, smudged, faded. A small star next to "Legacy is process, not personality." Another beside, "Leadership isn't declared, it's documented." I sat with it for a while, not angry, not smug, just still. Because the part no one tells you, the part the articles and seminars and onboarding retreats never say, is that the people who really shape culture almost never stand at the front of the room. They're buried in the infrastructure. The checklists, the workflows that keep the chaos from becoming collapse. They're the ones who knew that core values didn't mean kombucha fridges and trust falls. It meant showing up, protecting what worked, silently guarding the mechanisms that let other people take credit and still sleep at night. Madison had finally seen it. She didn't need to say more. In the morning, Rains stopped by before his flight. He didn't ask for a meeting. Just showed up at the edge of my office, coffee in hand, watching the sun slice through the blinds like it was giving the building a fresh start. "You saved us from a mess," he said. No theatrics, just truth. Then, surprisingly, he hugged me. Brief, strong, the kind that says more than boardroom applause ever could. He pulled back, smiling like a man who just watched a train derail and somehow ended up on the right platform anyway. "Ready to crush this merger now?" I looked down at the handbook. At my old notes, the dog-eared pages, the values nobody ever quotes out loud. Looks like I already did. The merger closed on a Thursday. No champagne, no press junket. Just quiet signatures on revised terms, a click of encrypted keys, and a system integration that finally went through. This time without a single red screen. Madison's title had been massaged into something polite. Strategic Cultural Advisor. She still got a badge, still had a desk, but no approval authority, no system access, no hand on the wheel. She didn't fight it. She just nodded when the documents came through. Whether it was humility or exhaustion, I didn't care. The damage had been contained. The system, my system, held. Martin resigned by Q2. He said it was time to explore advisory opportunities. But the writing was on the wall, even if he was the one who'd helped paint it. The moment he let someone else override protocol without understanding what held the place together, he'd signed his own fade out. Legacy doesn't care how well you speak in boardrooms. It cares what survives after you leave. Rains didn't wait long. The new CEO was someone I'd flagged 2 years prior. Quietly. No fanfare. A woman from a partner firm who understood compliance, didn't fear unsexy infrastructure, and asked the right questions about operational scale. She took the seat like she'd been waiting her whole life, not to lead loudly, but to lead correctly. We never announced Clause 8.4c, never made it a public thing, but inside the closing docs, buried right where it had always lived, was the official retirement. Clause 8.4c, hereby rendered obsolete upon conclusion of this transaction. A single sentence, tidy, precise, but not before it had done what it was meant to do. For 12 years, that clause sat dormant, not because it was forgotten, but because it didn't need to be used until it did. It was never about authority, it was about stewardship, about making sure that when legacy was threatened by flash and power suits, there was still a spine in the machine. I didn't take a new title, didn't move offices, didn't post a thing on LinkedIn. I just stayed where I'd always been, 3 doors from the server room, 5 from legal, sitting behind the firewall I helped build, watching the system run clean again. No spotlight, just control where it mattered.
고구마 먹은 뭐 이런 건 줄 알았어.
원래 이 매니저는 당장을 보호해. 당장을 보호해주고 이렇게 해줘야 되는데 뭐 당장 까는 맛에 방에 들어오는데 무슨 고매야 고매는. 응?
그나 삼촌방에 고매할 사람이 있나?
없어. 너 네가 친걸 잘 봐. 그리고
원희 물결표님이 티키타카지.
그게 티키타카야 그게?
그치. 근데 내가 어디 얘기했지? 삼촌 아니 생각을 한다고.
나는 방송이 끝나면 애기가 아파. 가슴이
울어.
답답하고.
원희 물결표님이 키키키키키.
그리고 또 음식은 되새김질 잘 안 하는데 그 상처를 되새김질 하더라. 언니가 나한테 그랬어 이러면서. 원래 아프리카 이게 방방반데 방장이 방방방한데.
원희 물결표님이 좀 있어봐. 저주 인형 만들 거야 키키요.